Forum. My name is Laura Grube, and I am a professor of economics at Beloit College and also the Albert Meese Chair in Economics. The Upton Forum was designed to advance student understanding of the nature and causes of wealth and well-being. The forum is named after the 6th president of Beloit College, Miller Upton, who was an economist by training. He was an advocate of the ideals of the liberal society, political freedom, rule of law, and the promotion of peace and prosperity through the voluntary exchange of goods, services, and ideas. Our Upton Scholar this year is Joel Mokyr, the Robert H. Strauss Professor of Arts and Sciences and Professor of Economics and History at Northwestern University. He specializes in the economics of technological change and specifically why it is that the British Industrial Revolution took place where it did and when it did. Tonight, however, we're going to move from Northwestern Europe, Britain, in the 18th century to Beloit, Wisconsin in the 19th century and beyond. If you recall a moment ago, I said that I hold the Meese Chair in Economics. I'd like to point out that this chair is named, in fact, after a Beloit business leader who was the president of Beloit Iron Works. Importantly, the Meese Family Foundation made a generous gift to ensure that the Upton Forum continues for years to come, so thank you very much. Before I share the details about tonight's panel, though, and the speakers who are joining us, I need to remind you about a few events that are happening tomorrow. So tomorrow afternoon at 1 p.m. there is a panel on the ideas and influence of Joel Mokyr. So that's 1 p.m. to 2:30 in the Moore Lounge of Pearson. So different side of campus. And then in the evening at 7 p.m. and yet another location. So we're really just doing a tour of campus, maybe a historical tour of campus. 7 p.m. Joel Mokyr will give his keynote, and that is in Eaton Chapel. This evening, we'll hear from 3 speakers who will present different aspects of the economic history of Beloit. Each speaker will present for about 20 to 25 minutes. We'll be starting with Beatrice McKenzie, Fred Burwell, and then Rob Gerbitz. And then after those 3 have given their remarks, we're going to turn to Professor Mokyr, who is going to give a few comments, and then we will open up the floor. So our first speaker of the evening is Dr. Beatrice McKenzie, Emeritus Professor of History at Beloit College. Beatrice has taught and published in the areas of U.S. history, 1861 to 1945, and 1945 to the present, the history of U.S. immigration and refugee policy, 1860 to the present, the history of the U.S. and Mexico, and the history of the U.S. and Cuba, as well as women and gender history. A member of the Beloit community for many years, Beatrice taught a public history course entitled Coming Up North, a History Harvest about Black Migration in Beloit. She taught that with Jackie Jackson and also Ellen Joyce of the Beloit College History Department. She is the author of The Wongs of Beloit, Wisconsin, published by UW-Wisconsin Press in 2022, in which she, quotes, traces the many lives of a resilient, multi-generational family whose experiences parallel the complicated relationship between America and China in the 20th century. So Beatrice is going to be talking with us about the people of Beloit. And then we have Fred Burwell, who I think many of us know. So Fred is a Beloit College graduate and archivist of Beloit College. He's worked at the college for 4 decades, and during that time, he's cared for and looked after the historical documents of the college, mentored and encouraged dozens of Beloit College students who worked in the archives or consulted Fred on a class project, and shared stories of the college with thousands of alumni and other interested parties. He is well known for his series Fridays with Fred, which is now a collection of over 150 stories about people and events in the college's past. So Fred is going to be speaking on the founding of Beloit College. And then finally, we have Rob Gerbitz. So Rob is the president and CEO of Hendricks Commercial Properties. Founded and established by Diane Hendricks in 1974, HCP is a national diversified real estate investment and development company headquartered right here in Beloit, Wisconsin. Today, the company comprises 10 million square feet located in 30 states, with its core asset classes being industrial, retail, mixed-use, commercial, and residential, as well as hospitality. I think many of us have eaten at maybe an HCP restaurant downtown. Rob's responsibilities as president and CEO include the oversight and direction of all business operations, initiatives, and strategic planning for the company and its subsidiaries. Rob is involved in a number of business development partnerships, including the Greater Beloit Economic Development Corporation, where he's on the board of directors, the Rock County 5.0 Advisory Council, where he is a member, a 5-year private-public development initiative to revitalize Rock County's economy, and Beloit 200, an economic development group committed to the ongoing new urbanization of downtown Beloit. In his role, Rob has taken an active interest in learning about the history of Beloit and has incorporated that history into new and revitalized buildings throughout the city. So thank you, and please join me in welcoming our 3 panelists for this evening.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Professor Groove and the entire Department of Business and Economics at Beloit College. And research thanks for this presentation are due especially to the Beloit Historical Society, to Fred Burwell, and to Chris Nelson. Beloit is a small city in the industrial Midwest that's rich in natural resources. Rivers, streams, fertile soil, and built resources that include transportation networks, proximity markets, and a favorable business climate. I presented in an earlier college forum about the globalization of Beloit in the period between 1880 and 1920. Today I'd like to focus on the history of the peopling of this city, so it's broader and then also maybe ends in 1930 as well. So, who came to Beloit? These are the research questions that I have. Where did they come from? What drew them? How did they fare? And did their families stay here? For the century between 1830 and 1930, after the U.S. removed Native Americans from the area, Beloit's resources drew migrants from the East Coast and the Deep South, as well as immigrants from Northern and Southern Europe. Without exception, individuals and families sought a good future defined by job opportunities and good schools. Same things that immigrants are looking for now. Migrants' nationality, gender, and race influence their ability to remain and their access to opportunities for success. So I've divided the presentation into 3 periods of population change: Native sovereignty and U.S. territorial ambition, settlers and old immigrants, and new immigrants and African Americans. The area where Beloit, Wisconsin sits now has been the largest Ho-Chunk population center for centuries prior to its claim by white settlers. U.S. Native American policy and U.S. land policy drew European Americans who came as speculators and as settlers. As the town became an industrial center, town leaders encouraged continual in-migration, drawing migrants from the international labor pool. Early in the 19th century, 4,500 Ho-Chunk in 40 geographically dispersed bands lived in the area west of the Great Lakes. The largest Ho-Chunk village, Key-Chunk, or the Turtle, was right here, 3 blocks from here, at the confluence of Turtle Creek and the Rock River. In 1829, the Turtle had a population of 700 in 35 distinct lodges, a lodge being a large permanent dwelling that housed multiple families. Ho-Chunk lived at the Turtle through winter, spring, and summer. In summer, they cultivated corn in the flats south of Turtle Creek and east of the Rock River. I was thinking maybe like where the McDonald's is. They stored corn underground and used it through the year. They tapped maple trees for sugar in late winter, and then fished starting in spring. And sometimes in spring, but especially in fall, the people moved to temporary camps to hunt buffalo before they were extinct, and then deer and elk after. They moved south, north, and west to various hunting grounds in what was, after 1813, Michigan territory, but would later become the states of Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa. The extent of Ho-Chunk hunting grounds bound by Green Bay, Lake Michigan, the Rock River, and the Mississippi River can be seen on this map. The lack of Native Americans in the historical record of Beloit, despite the significance of the size of the Ho-Chunk population and their unqualified sovereignty over the land, is no minor error. As Stephen Kantrowitz argues, Americans have learned to tell our story as though Native peoples, if they were there at all, played minor or reactive roles. Kantrowitz and other historians writing since 2010 examine the uses and misuses of law, military, and extrajudicial authority to dispossess Native Americans from their homelands and replace them with European and American settlers. I recommend Stephen Kantrowitz's book, published this year, to all. He's a professor up at the University of Wisconsin. After the U.S. and Britain signed treaties in 1783 and 1814, a messy colonialism unfolded in the territories of the Great Lakes region. Though the U.S. Congress envisioned an orderly process of treaties that acquired land and required natives to leave, American squatters flooded over treaty boundaries and claimed the land, and then demanded U.S. Army protection against natives. 4 treaties that sought to dispossess the Ho-Chunk of their land and remove them west of the Mississippi River, although some Ho-Chunk managed to remain in central and northern Wisconsin and are still there. The first treaty, made in 1825 at Prairie du Chien, on the Mississippi River, required different native groups to state exactly which land they possessed on a map of the area. So that's what this land was made for. The second treaty, following confrontations over lead resources near Galena, Illinois, and along the Mississippi, required a temporary cession of Ho-Chunk land to the west of the Rock River. So that's across, well, it's this side of the river. The third treaty, signed in 1832, followed the Black Hawk War, though Ho-Chunk sided with the Americans in that war, because some Ho-Chunk helped Sauk and Fox escape American soldiers through Ho-Chunk territory. That treaty required cession of all Ho-Chunk land south and east of the Wisconsin River, including here, well, including the other side of the river. I think of here, Beloit College is the other side. The land where the village of Turtle stood. Finally, in 1837, U.S. authorities literally held a delegation of Ho-Chunk negotiators hostage in Washington, D.C. until they agreed to treaty terms, relinquished all land east of the Mississippi River, and removed the entire tribe to the neutral ground west of the Mississippi. So that's all explained in Kantrowitz's book. I really recommend it. This is a very complicated vision of removals over time. The first European-American settler in what is now the Beloit area was a trapper and fur trader from Quebec named Joseph Thibault, who lived here from 1824 to 1836. Married to a native woman, he built a log cabin nearby the village of Turtle and sold furs to American Fur Company traders in Chicago and Milwaukee. As the Ho-Chunk were being removed, Thibault claimed 3 looks of property at the confluence of the 2 rivers. By U.S. law, that claim relied on Thibault's race and his gender. So he was white and he was a male. This is the claim he would sell to a newcomer in 1837. U.S. Native American policy and U.S. land policy undergirded the founding of Beloit. Veterans from the Black Hawk War and settlers who had already set up in Rockford and Belvidere, Illinois, encouraged newcomers to the area. Well before the U.S. set up a land office to survey and sell title to the land, squatters could stake a claim, start to farm it, and sell parts of the claim to others. The first settlers of Beloit came from New England, from Vermont, New York, and New Hampshire. Many of them had previously sought claims in other areas west of New England as the nation expanded. I'd like to shift perspectives now and tell the story of an early settler we haven't heard much about, Lucius Fisher. Born in Vermont and son of farmers there, parents who could not afford to send him to university, Lucius took a job when he was 26 years old selling Fairbanks scales in the West. Yes, that Fairbanks. I'm so interested in people's travels, people's journeys, but I couldn't focus on everything, but I did manage a few routes in this presentation. So, like many migrants, Fisher took the job in order to explore opportunities for himself in the West. He had the misfortune, though, of setting out during the economic panic of 1837. So having made it in a stagecoach to Troy, New York, he went on the Erie Canal, but he was unable to either sell new scales or collect monies owed to Fairbanks. So he arrived in Buffalo, New York, and on a whim, he asked the captain of a ship for passage to Chicago. That trip was by schooner. It set out on still icy lakes in early June, and the trip took 4 weeks and 2 days. From Chicago, Lucius took a steamer to Milwaukee and walked on the Indian Trail from Milwaukee to the Rock River. So there's a great map of Indian trails of Wisconsin available on DPLA. If you are a research nerd, look up anything you want on DPLA. But here's the trip that he actually took. Two men he met in the town of Jefferson on the Rock River, 40 miles north of here, persuaded him to visit what was called New Albany, that was Beloit, and offered him a financial interest in the claims they had recently purchased there. Lucius joined up with them. They purchased a canoe from Ho-Chunk Indians in a large encampment near Jefferson. And traveling south on the Rock River, the men stayed in Fort Atkinson and Janesville before arriving in Beloit. They found a single settler family in Beloit, the Blodgetts. Just a few months earlier, Caleb Blodgett bought the land claim held by the French-Canadian fur trader, Thibault. Lucius Fisher and his party arrived on a Sunday, and the 26-year-old recorded his first impressions of Beloit from the bluff where the college now stands. Quote, "We had an uninterrupted view of the prairie. I said to my friend with me that it was the most beautiful landscape view I had ever seen." Fisher's intended stay of a couple years was extended. He served multiple business and civic roles, and he lived most of his life here in Beloit. Beyond U.S. Native American and land policy in the West, one of the reasons the town of Beloit grew so rapidly in the mid-19th century is that a sizable community of families from the East Coast migrated together, bringing resources and people with them. The New England Emigrating Company of Colebrook, New Hampshire, made up of 14 men, sent Dr. Horace White, the one that the park was named after, and 2 others to the area here in February 1837. White, Bicknell, and Crane purchased a third of Blodgett's claim for $2,500. So I forgot to mention that Blodgett paid Thibault $200, and then he earned for a third of it $2,500. And they encouraged other New Hampshire families to join them. The group's status as early comers, combined with their race and gender, allowed these land colonists, as they call themselves, to prosper quickly. This chart is so neat. This chart shows the investment of each of the 14 men and how they divided their pooled resources. So you can see, for example, that Cyrus Ames invested $630. He's the guy at the top. In the division of property, he got a 200-acre farm, buildings that were on it, 2 lots of timber that he could cut down and use or sell. He got cash from an investor who didn't make the trip. And I think most importantly, he acquired 26 lots in the town of Beloit that he could sell to newcomers. Ames and the others did well. We don't have much in the record about what happened to the recently removed Native Americans, but there are some indications if you look for them. Settlers hired them as guides. Settlers purchased their canoes and horses. Settlers hired them to break prairie, which is extremely difficult. Settlers hired Native Americans from a camp across the river, so this side, where they were held under army guard to clear timber and to build log cabins. The latter piece of evidence happened in 1837 while the removal treaty was being negotiated in Washington, D.C. It would be 2 years before the U.S. Land Office was set up to sell lots to settlers. Beloiters referred to the town right away as industrial, and within a decade its history became an industrial history. The New Englanders and other settlers quickly set up factories and shops. A sawmill first, 1837. A store, 1838. The first churches, a post office, a bridge across the river, 1839. A dam and the college in 1844. The fast-moving Rock River provided energy for industrial growth, and the west side, this side, rapidly grew to become a regional industrial center. Incorporated in 1846, the village became a city in 1856 with William Goodhue as its first mayor. The construction of railroads across the region from the 1850s to 1880s facilitated the growth of Midwestern cities and their hinterlands. Two major passenger and freight railway lines, the Chicago Northwestern and the Racine and Southwestern, connected Beloit and its industries to Midwestern and national markets. That flour and sawmill were followed by paper products and farm tool manufacturing. Two businesses that persisted in some form into the 20th century were Merrill & Houston Ironworks and Eclipse Wind Engine and Company. Merrill & Houston made tools and then paper-making machines, and Eclipse made windmills. The town became in that era known as Iron City. I've elsewhere written about Beloit as a small city, a city that encompasses a few elite manufacturers and a predominantly American-born middle-class elite who promote local boosterism and wielded social control that kept working class and transient residents in check. Capital growth in Beloit was mainly local until these major industries first marketed products and then expanded production internationally at the end of the 19th century. This industrial growth relied on a steady stream of laborers from the vast number of European immigrants and their children. Local industries that thrived were Beloit Ironworks, which I showed you in that previous slide, which was established in 1885 from the remnants of Merrill & Houston. Gerbitz Morrison Company, which was established in 1893 from the remnants of Eclipse Wind Engine Company. Berlin Machine Works, which moved to Beloit from New Berlin, Wisconsin in 1887 and changed its name in World War I to the P.B. Yates Machine Works because Berlin was associated with our enemy. And Warner Instruments, established in 1902, among others. In 1911, Beloit's factories operated at full capacity due to recent growth. But not everyone in town worked in industry, and you can find out exactly where they worked if you go to Beloit Historical Society and look at the 1889 handbook of Beloit, and they've got numerous handbooks. And people listed their occupations as blacksmiths, shopkeepers, carpenters, cigar makers, growers of wheat, and tailors, among others. Mixed in with the East Coast migrants were people who had immigrated from overseas or from Canada. But soon the growing industrial businesses attracted workers from the largest immigrant groups arriving to cities across the United States. Beloit's population growth expanded much more quickly than the populations of the state of Wisconsin or the entire United States. Like other destinations in the Midwest, the largest immigrant groups to Beloit in the 1870s and 80s were Germans, Irish, and Scandinavians, here especially Norwegians. Among immigrant groups, Germans and Scandinavians enjoy preferential treatment in Beloit. The German communities of Chicago and Milwaukee are legend, and many Germans settled in Beloit as well. A vocal group in Beloit claims Norwegian ancestry and a smaller group Irish. The Norwegians had been here the longest. A group of Norwegians had arrived to farm in what is called the Luther Valley in the 1840s, and some of their large families relocated to Beloit and other towns and cities in the region. The preference for Germans and Scandinavians endured. In 1815, an ad for a servant in a Beloit home read, "Competent girl, German or Scandinavian preferred." Sorry, that was 1915. Leading families of Beloit, such as William Aldrich, windmill manufacturer, and his son Alonzo Aldrich, owner of Beloit Ironworks, had a young Swedish, Danish, and Norwegian American woman at different points in the census in their home as a servant or for child care. The children of German, Irish, and Scandinavian immigrants prospered thanks to the good living earned by their parents and to the fine public schools here. The best educated in the second generation studied engineering, medicine, and law. Some left for other U.S. cities, but others remained here to be city leaders and workers and managers in Beloit's factories. There aren't a lot of histories of these middle-class Beloiters, but I have evidence for many individuals and offer two examples here. John Voss, whose mother was a German immigrant, was born in Beloit in 1888. His dad worked in Beloit as a blacksmith. Voss Jr. started working at Fairbanks at age 25, and 41 years later he retired as a foreman of blacksmith, rough forge, and die sinking in the forge shop. James Hanlon, son of 2 Irish immigrants, started working at Fairbanks Morse in May 1913. We can judge his parents' modest level of wealth by the presence of 4 boarders in the household in 1900. By January 1952, James was general foreman of machine repair and president of the Fairbanks Morse Recreational Council. I thought that was sort of fun, like the fun party guy. The thriving industrial economy in Beloit around the turn of the 20th century continued to draw immigrants, migrants, and their children. Beginning in the 1880s and continuing until World War I, immigrants from Eastern and Southern Europe, particularly Italians, Greeks, and Lithuanians, settled in Beloit, an increase of 65% from 1890 to 1900 alone. As the Industrial Revolution transformed economies in Europe, immigrants arrived in much greater numbers. Like the earlier immigrants, they came for the good industrial jobs, good schools, and the ability to purchase a home in Beloit. At Fairbanks in 1923, the number of workers born in Italy and Greece exceeded the number born in Norway, Ireland, or Germany. The town provided integration services to these migrants, from basic literacy classes to classes for clerks and office personnel, for sewing and dressmaking, and for automotive work, including repairing, disassembling, and reassembling engines and motor cars. One adult night school class in 1915 had 6 Italians, 3 Austrians, 2 Greeks, a Russian, and a Lithuanian student. Very different immigrant group than today or than earlier. Italian and Greek newcomers faced discrimination in Beloit. Many articles in the Beloit press decried degenerate Greeks who, quote, howled and cursed in the streets, and Italians who, quote, have accomplished practically nothing for their own betterment in the last several years. Italians had been found responsible for stealing coal from the St. Paul freight yard in town. This was in February, so I imagine I'd have been right there with them. Italian immigrants made up 1/3 of the families who applied for aid during a 2-week period in February 1915. And newspaper accounts suggested, but didn't say outright, that Italians were used as strikebreakers. The reputations of these young Italian and Greek men changed, however, when they returned to Europe to fight for their nations at the beginning of World War I. Accounts through the war followed young men who returned to the front in Greece and Italy, and some local workers were killed, and then they were spoken about much more favorably after the war. African Americans were critical to Beloit's industrial development during World War I. A cutoff in international migration due to the war hampered production in northern factories like Fairbanks Morse. Fairbanks had large orders for their diesel engines, but they needed workers to meet production goals. Black residents of Mississippi and other states were pushed north by the limited job opportunities and inadequate schools in the South, while newspapers like the Chicago Defender promised access to good jobs, schools, and civil rights in the North. In 1917, Fairbanks sent a black worker, John Mokyr, to Mississippi to recruit laborers, promising 22.5 cents per hour. Another Fairbanks plan recruited students from Tuskegee Institute as summer interns in the 1910s. So this generation thinks they're the first to be interns, but you aren't. The population of black Beloiters who had appeared in the Beloit census since 1850 grew through the 19th century. Even so, there were fewer than 100 African Americans in the city and township in 1910. But that number grew to 834 in 1920, a figure that stayed around the same size until the industrial boom during World War II and the Cold War. By 1970, the African American population of Beloit and the township was over 3,000, about 10% of the total. Although African Americans face systemic racism in the North, in Beloit too, opportunities in education, and especially through the organization of and participation in black social organizations like the church, helped some individuals and families thrive in Beloit. Systemic racism existed in Beloit. Fairbanks segregated its employees, building the Edgewater Flats, 4 concrete block apartments with 24 two-story units across the river, this side, for black employees. and 138 houses near the factory for white employees. It also built a segregated YMCA on 6th Street, initially to house the Tuskegee students. And so Beloit had segregated YMCAs and scout troops. By 1920, many restaurants and lunch counters in Beloit refused to serve black patrons. Segregation occurred in the workplace too. Factories relegated black workers to particular jobs in the foundries and power plants, and for decades it was impossible to move to other areas of the factories, to less dangerous jobs that had better pay. Moreover, the largest factories colluded to deny jobs to black workers who complained or demanded change. Professional jobs such as teacher were denied to migrants who came north with credentials and experience. Between limited advancement in the workplace and systemic racism in the town, many black residents did not stay. They sought work elsewhere, whether Madison, Milwaukee, or sites in Illinois and Iowa. And you can find this all over the census. You just look for the same name every 10 years and figure out where they are. Some black workers, like the Johnson brothers, found the means to advance. In 1917, Joseph Johnson and his two brothers, Jim and Wade, migrated to Beloit with their wives and children. Working as sharecroppers in Phoeba, Mississippi, the three families came north by train looking for a better future, just like all of the others I've spoken about tonight. The brothers were hired to work in the foundry at Fairbanks Morse, and they joined other recent arrivals in a temporary camp set up right next to the factory. After 2 or 3 years working at Fairbanks and pooling their money, the Johnson brothers purchased homes on the 1100 block of Pleasant Street, right across from the factory where those new homes had been built for white workers. And they opened Johnson's grocery store a few blocks away on the corner of Pleasant and Portland Streets. Similar to the experience of the migrants of the New England Emigrating Company, that they migrated as a small community, allowed the Johnson family to rapidly improve their circumstances. They were also able to bypass job and housing discrimination. Attending well-funded and unsegregated public schools in Beloit benefited the children and grandchildren of African American migrants. Joseph Johnson's son, Philip, who was only 4 when the family moved to Beloit, attended Wright Elementary, Roosevelt Junior High School, and Beloit Memorial High School, from which he graduated in 1984. His son Philip worked at Fairbanks too. He met his wife Christabel at a school dance in high school, and she's here in the photo, I think the third from the left. And in the 1930s, Philip was active in the NAACP. Later, he became a Rock County commissioner, and he volunteered in other civic organizations. The family were leaders at the New Zion Baptist Church, where Christabel led Bible study and sang, and Philip was a deacon. Although they were educated in Beloit schools, the high-achieving African-American children, their children, recognized that because of a racist atmosphere in the largest industries, their futures lay elsewhere. Philip's children attended university, becoming a television producer, an attorney, and a financial manager. Philip's son, Philip Leslie, attended Princeton University on an ROTC scholarship and served as a helicopter pilot for 3 tours in the Vietnam War. After the war, he became an attorney and moved to Los Angeles. Philip Sr.'s youngest daughter, Beverly, having raised 3 successful kids and working in government, returned to Beloit in retirement, and she works now at the New Zion Baptist Church. It's difficult to tell a single story that encompasses the ugly with the impressive history of the peopling of the city of Beloit. The first European American settlers had a real leg up, squatting on the land while the U.S. government managed the legalities of treaties and land law with Native Americans. The Ho-Chunk, who never entirely disappeared from the state, lost in those interactions. Over time, economic and social opportunity drew migrants to Beloit, from New Englanders seeking land and prosperity in the West, to various immigrant groups from Northern, Southern, and Eastern Europe, to African American migrants from the South. Migrants came to Beloit looking for well-paid jobs, good schools, and the ability to live a good life in community. Their children benefited from the education and community involvement, but if opportunities seemed limited, migrants and their children left, often for other Midwestern cities and towns. Since the 1990s, a new group of immigrants, Latinos, have come to Beloit, drawn by prospects for a better life for themselves and their children. Latinos are working in many industries that exist here now. Fairbanks Morse, Frito-Lay, Kettle, Foods, Hormel, among others. Latinos have opened businesses, joined churches, and reinvigorated the community in many different ways. know there's a push in American schools generally and in Beloit specifically to train workers for nearby industries. I hope that the training is not too specific. It's my belief that an excellent general education will have a better chance of allowing the second generation opportunities to remain and strengthen the community. Thank you.
Hello everyone. My title is Can We Have a College Here? Horace White and the New England Emigrating Company in search of a new home. Let's travel back today to a day in late October 1836, 187 years ago. As the leaves turned golden, orange, and fiery red, the young men of Colebrook, New Hampshire, gazed westward and pondered their futures. The most enterprising gathered together and established the New England Emigrating Company, with plans to move once they settled on the best location. Several factors contributed to their desire to move west. Colebrook's winters, said one writer, lasted 7 months. Played out soils and short summers led to poor crops and even crop failure. The National Depression in 1836 didn't help matters. Books and pamphlets touted the fertile lands opening up west. Enter 27-year-old physician Horace White, Dartmouth College graduate, selected by the company as their agent. That winter of 1836-37, he set out on an arduous journey, often traveling by cutter, a small horse-drawn sleigh. He visited promising and not so promising regions in Iowa and Illinois, and one day happened upon a lovely valley in Wisconsin Territory. He stood on the eastern bank of the Rock River, gazed at its pristine fish-filled waters, and liked what he saw. Unbroken prairies spread far in the distance, its rich soil ideal for farming. Fir oak trees stretched their gnarly branches high on a nearby bluff. A perfect site, although he didn't know it yet, for a college. So some of you may recognize this is from Big Hill. We don't have any photographs from the 1830s, so these have to suffice, but I have some images of what they might have seen at that time. So the Rock River and the bluff. An earlier settler, Vermonter Caleb Blodgett, had purchased land from Thibault, a French-Canadian trader. On March 14, 1837, Horace White hunkered down with Blodgett, worked out a deal for land, and then went home, where he stunned everyone with the story that he had plowed a furrow of land in February. For the next few years, citizens from Colebrook and elsewhere populated Turtle, which changed its name to Blodgett's Place. You can imagine Blodgett's Place College, then to Albany, and finally to more original and euphonious Beloit. In 1837, Dr. White commissioned a planning map known as the Kelsey Survey, which imagined the new city as the pioneers hoped it would be. Nestled among Canal Street and Hydraulic Street appeared a College Street. Settlers moving west from New England wanted familiar institutions, including mills, mercantile establishments, churches, and schools. The best eastern cities also had colleges. Why not Beloit? By 1840, the entire population of Wisconsin Territory stood at 30,945, several thousand less than Beloit's population today. As its settlers built log cabins and lived off the land, using barter and what little cash they had to purchase supplies, the New England-style village took shape. In 1838, students at Beloit's first school met in the kitchen of Horace White's log house. In 1842, Beloit built its first church, located at the northwest corner of Broad and Prospect Streets. By 1843, a new school, the Beloit Seminary, had begun instruction in the church basement. Although an excellent preparatory school, it wasn't yet a college. I don't have anything quite that far back, but it's a seminary document from, I think, 1848. So it gives you a little sense of how many students were there. It was actually both co-ed at the time. First steps toward college. In June of 1844, a convention of Western ministers and Western ministers and churches met at Cleveland, Ohio. Returning west on Lake Erie, some of the delegates gathered in a tiny stateroom on board the steamer Chesapeake, including Yale College alumni, the Reverend Stephen Pete and Aaron Lucius Chapin, and a pastor at the Presbyterian Church in Milwaukee. Chapin recalled the meeting. You may see 7 of us crowded together in that narrow room, Stephen Peet, foremost and chief of the founders of Beloit College, is lying on the berth, ill in body, but his fertile mind is active as ever. The Western College Society was fairly organized, and a hand from the East will be stretched out to help on the establishment of genuine Christian colleges in the West. Pete seizes on the gleam of encouragement. There's an earnest consultation, there's a fervent prayer, there's a settled purpose, and Beloit College is a living conception. So I like to consider the very beginning of the Beloit College archives. They wanted to keep track of their records. The men set to work through a series of conventions held in Beloit during 1844-45, with plans to establish a college near the Illinois and Wisconsin border. Several communities lobbied for the college, but Beloit made the strongest case. At the third convention in May of 1845, 68 of 69 attendees voted to establish a college at Beloit. On October 23, the Beloit College trustees convened for the first time. Yale graduate and longtime trustee George S.F. Savage wrote later, "I wish that we had a photograph of those trustees as they prayed and counseled together, how without funds, without a campus, without a building, without a library or scientific apparatus, without a faculty, with only a name to begin with, they could develop and build up a Christian college that should be the worthy peer of long-established and fully equipped Eastern institutions." Establishing a college in a remote but growing territory was a daunting task. In his historical sketches of Beloit College, President Edward Dwight Eaton observed that at that time, Beloit was 500 miles from the nearest trunk line of a railroad. It required about 3 days driving to reach Beloit from Chicago or Milwaukee. Eaton described Beloit College as absolutely nothing but a name, a hope, a purpose, a prayer. College site. And here we have Lucius Fisher, Beatrice mentioned. First, Beloit citizens had offered a 50-acre site upriver, the eventual location of Fairbanks and Morrison Company. The trustees wanted a site closer to downtown. Enter one of Beloit's founders, Lucius Fisher. On a warm, sunny Sunday in 1837, he had climbed up to the bluff where the college now stands and gazed at the lush panorama before him. I had an uninterrupted view of prairie such as I had never had before, he wrote later. I said to my friend with me that it was the most beautiful landscape that I had ever seen. Fisher purchased the property and intended to build his house overlooking the river and expanding downtown. Then he changed his mind. As a young man in Vermont, circumstances prevented him from obtaining the college education he always desired. He believed in higher education, and to help the incipient college, offered his prime land on the bluff and persuaded other pioneer Beloiters to do likewise. Now Beloit citizens donated this combined 10-acre site, and by 1846 it pledged $7,000 to fund construction of the college's first building. This is a deed of that, their property that they donated. Sereno T. Merrill, later a pioneer in Beloit industry, but then the principal of Beloit Seminary, recalled that in order to show a smidgen of progress, Lucius Fisher, quote, had a few loads of stone hauled upon the campus to show that work was underway at last. Not long after, as Merrill said, they officially broke ground. Let us follow the crowd and stand beside those men of faith. A few shovelfuls of earth were removed from the spot which now marks the northwest corner of Middle College, and a few stones laid. However, it would take years of stops and starts to actually complete Beloit College's first building. Professor Robert K. Richardson once described the efforts to finish Middle College as compounded of the sweat and weariness of its givers. It was an undertaking of communal dedication and personal devotion akin to the cathedral building of the Middle Ages. This is a draft of the first charter. Meanwhile, the trustees prepared a college charter enacted by the Wisconsin Territorial Legislature on February 2, 1846, and under the tutelage of Sereno T. Merrill, several ambitious Beloit Seminary students were preparing for college. Newspapers began to take notice of the fledgling college. One, the American Freeman of Prairieville, Wisconsin, praised the decision, but was not a given at the time. We are happy to learn, among other things favorable to this rising college, that it is to be open to colored students on equal terms with others. Though nearly 50 years would pass until Beloit College admitted women, it was already planning for a diverse student body. Reverend Henry Barber of Dutchess County, New York, had written to Stephen Peet on April 1, 1847. You know that I am an abolitionist and a friend of the colored man, whether bond or free. I think it a most unreasonable thing that the free colored man should be reproached for his ignorance, and at the same time be prevented from improving his mind by being excluded from seminaries of learning. As Professor Joseph Emerson stated in his 10th anniversary address, The founders accepted Barber's donation of 160 acres, which netted $1,000, quote, on the express condition that students should be received in the college without respect to color. President Chapin alluded to the decision in his inaugural address of 1850, a college must stand with open door to youth of every rank and condition in life. On June 24, 1847, 2,000 citizens from Beloit and vicinity crowded under the campus oaks to witness the fulfillment of their pledges to build a college. They enjoyed lively melodies from Beloit's city band, sang songs, listened to Aaron Chapin's brief history of Beloit College, and endured multiple speeches. One of the orators, Reverend Alexander Montgomery, insisted, quote, that Western minds should be educated on Western soil, and that the education of the West should be expanded, liberal, and democratic, a universally polished Westernism. Afterwards, the crowd moved into the open where stonemasons had erected tentative-looking walls ready for the bricklayers who were gathered at the southeast corner. Officials had prepared a, quote, leaden box to serve as a time capsule. The Milwaukee Daily Sentinel reported its contents as the charter of the college and sundry other documents, a copy of Latham's, Wisconsin, and McCabe's directory in Milwaukee, papers of the day, and some specimens of currency, metallic and paper. After sealing the box and placing it inside the cornerstone, and after another speech, workmen set the cornerstone in place where it still resides, its date proudly carved in soft limestone, now worn and weathered. Once dubbed the college edifice, we know the building today as Middle College. For students. On a cold evening in early November 1847, 5 students buckled down and underwent rigorous examinations in Latin and Greek, mathematics, geography, and English grammar. The following Monday, November 8th, they entered Beloit College as its first students, with Serena T. Merrill continuing as their instructor. Okay, so here's Merrill as a young man. First, they continued their studies in the basement of the Old Stone Church before moving to the unfinished Middle College, joined by students from Beloit Seminary. An early student, Harlan M. Page, remembered for months and even for years afterwards, recitations were held in rooms roughly plastered, the ceiling supported by tamarack poles, and they were the bartons. In the fall of 1848, the college opened its preparatory department, which included sub-departments focused on preparation for college, a normal department designed to prepare teachers, and a department focusing on general education. The preparatory department evolved into Beloit Academy, which through 1910 educated a large number of students from Beloit and the surrounding region, and was an important feeder for the college proper. Hearing rumors that Beloit College's longed-for first professors might arrive any day, members of the freshman class visited the stage office frequently, vowing to provide a warm welcome. Joseph Colley was a member of that class. Handwritten notes by his son George provides insight into just how impactful the establishing of the Pioneer College could be. Quote, he was born in Scotland, but his family came to this country when he was only 12. He reached the lead region of Wisconsin. They reached the lead region of Wisconsin at Mineral Point. He attended the country school there and soon finished what they had to offer and went to work in a lead mine. He was very anxious for a higher education, but there were no high schools or academies within easy reach. He resigned himself to giving up all thought of further education and decided to follow the draft labors of a miner for the rest of his life. One spring day in 1846, he learned that the territorial legislature of Wisconsin had granted a charter to the college to be formed at Beloit, the college to open in the fall of 1847. Can you imagine what that news meant to this Scotch lad? All at once, he realized that he was to be freed from the drudgery of a miner's life, enter the realm of scholars, to associate with the great minds of the past, and to fit himself to take a worthy part in the unfolding West. He hunted up a minister who had a college education and who agreed to tutor him in beginning Greek, Latin, and algebra. Spent the next year in trying to master these subjects as thoroughly as possible. In the early fall of 1847, he put a pack on his back and hitchhiked his way to Beloit. On arrival here, he learned the depressing news that there was no college building, only 4 bare walls without floors or roof or no faculty. He hunted up the trustee and asked what he should do. The trustee said, well, we intended to have a building ready, but the money gave out. We could not finish it. We said there will be a middle college someday. We have appointed a faculty, but they're not here. There will be a faculty someday. On the strength of that someday, he decided to stay. First faculty, Seeking to hire its first two professors, Beloit chose Jackson J. Bushnell and Joseph Emerson. Both 1841 graduates of Yale College at a salary of $600 per year, quote, if we can raise it. Many years later, Emerson described his friend Bushnell as having the soul of a poet, the mind of a scholar, the zeal of a man of business. Perhaps it was Bushnell's zeal that led him to arrive in Beloit a few weeks before Emerson. What was it like to see Beloit for the first time? What was it like to be one of the first to help bring Beloit College to life? Professor Bushnell's quarter-centennial speech provides first-hand experiences. Quote, on 27th of April, 1848, I came in sight of Beloit as the lumbering stage rose over the crest of the hill to northeast of Roscoe. I landed from the stage at the old Rock River House and soon found my way to the house of Reverend Mr. Clary, the Secretary of the Board of Trustees. The invitation which had brought me hither was to come and assist in the preliminary steps for the organization of the college. It will perhaps be a marvel to the future historian that Beloit College began to be a college on such slender means and upon so narrow a pecuniary basis. A few inquiries brought out the facts that at the time of my arrival, the college had no cash funds. For 6 months preceding my arrival, the walls of Middle College had stood floorless, windowless, and roofless without any means to finish it. On May 23rd, Joseph Emerson reached Beloit after traveling by carriage for 2 days in a steady rain. Jackson Bushnell remembered visiting with Emerson that very day. He came directly in my room, and almost his first question was, can we have a college here? Having had some experience in building up a college in Ohio, already 20 years old and still in peril of failure, and a vivid consciousness of our meager resources, I answered, yes, if we will make it. How heartily my honored colleague accepted this view and set himself to the work of making a college here. One day later, on May 24, 1848, the trustees assigned the Department of Languages to Joseph Emerson and the Department of Mathematics to Jackson J. Bushnell. Another early professor, William Porter, recalled Bushnell's and Emerson's mentorship to the college's first students, but his words ring true for generations of faculty and student relationships. There was not one who did not feel the uplifting power of those teachers' lives, not one who had not caught something of the enthusiasm of their high purpose. Altogether, the relationship of teacher and scholar had never seemed to me more beautiful. The Beloit spirit, which has always been so real and distinctive in the life of the college, was even then a pervading presence. Raising money and finishing the college edifice. And this is a later picture, 1860s era, showing the daredevil students all the way on top of the cupola. Things. That's about as early as we can get a photograph of the building. Even with a faculty of 2 and a tiny student body, the college's existence seemed tenuous at best. Bushnell sensed discouragement and disaffection among college supporters. The weather-beaten brick walls, he said, seemed to tell the community that began to build and were unable to finish. In order to complete construction, the college needed a new subscription from Beloit of at least $2,000. Since it seemed unlikely that the trustees could persuade tapped-out residents to give any more, one of their, quote, sanguine and self-confident young instructors offered to go door to door, as Bushnell wrote, not to solicit subscriptions, but to talk to college. 3 weeks of canvassing brought renewed enthusiasm, which led to pledges of $4,000. Despite the apparent success, however, pledges did not translate into immediate cash. The lean winter and spring of 1848-49 turned into 2 years of economic depression, and citizens paid much of the $4,000 through labor and supplies. In the summer of 1848, the young professors continued their proselytizing missions as agents for Beloit College. Emerson set out on horseback, covering southern Wisconsin and northern Illinois, while Bushnell headed east. They hoped to raise funds to endow professorships and scholarships, while also seeking books and scientific apparatus for use by students. Among other things, Bushnell secured and shipped 100 books, a barometer, a thermometer, a rain gauge, and a hygrometer. Early student Lucian B. Caswell remembered her determination. We were proud of this, for it was a college and it was in the hands of a faculty that knew no failure. This is a marker on Middle College, which talks about just how pioneer citizens of Beloit resolved to have a college. And then I have very earliest map of the campus showing the mounds and the Beloit College building. That was the only building. Okay, so the life of a college student in mid-19th century Beloit. This is the first catalog. From the beginning, Beloit College modeled its curriculum on that of Yale. Beloit's stringent entrance examinations kept numbers in the college quite small. Once accepted, students took only required courses, heavily classics-based, along with theology, moral, natural, and intellectual philosophies, as well as mathematics and several branches of the sciences. Rhetorical training was paramount, both designed to exercise the students in elocution, composition, and debate. What were conditions like for those early students? Here's Lucian B. Caswell, class of 1854. We all worked with an untiring industry to make up for lost years incident to pioneer life. That merciless bell on College Hill with Collie on the rope brought us to our feet at 5 in the morning. It was then a race up the hill to reach chapel in time for services. Then came a recitation, and finally we returned for breakfast. Athletics, games, and sports were cast aside. We were then for books, and books only would satisfy us. We were ambitious to learn, and were looking forward to service in that new field which our learning would open up for us. Despite a rigid schedule of prayers and studies, Beloit College students found time for extracurricular activities, conducting Sunday schools in nearby communities, founding the college's missionary society, and establishing the Arcane Society, a literary society which held public meetings, debates, and guest lectures attended by droves of citizens. Trustees and faculty encouraged this openness to the community, as noted by Emerson. We believe that the college is and ought to be a power in the community. Its influence ought to be felt, elevating and purifying the moral tone and ruling principles of the community. Okay, first president. Meanwhile, in December of 1849, the Board of Trustees elected Aaron Lucius Chapin as the college's first president. In deciding whether to accept the offer, Chapin wrote out an 8-page self-analysis and concluded, quote, "The college has from its first starting had a place for my heart, and I'm willing to devote myself entirely to its interests." Decision made, Chapin began his duties in February and was inaugurated on July 24, 1850. Commencement. Pounding of hammers broke the stillness of a warm summer day in July 1851. A few curious students wandered over to an oak grove in the northwest corner of the campus and watched workmen cobble together 2 large platforms. Another day, Beloit College graduated its first students. July 9 dawned bright and sunny and promised heat. Campus and town gathered that afternoon under a canopy of campus oak trees. The graduation ceremony opened with music and prayer, followed by student speeches, later described by Weekly Wisconsin as masterly productions, delivered with taste and effect, and would have done honor to any college in the land. Joseph Colley gave the valedictory address entitled "To Live is to Act." He was well aware of the first class's place in history. In his words, "We have seen an entire college spring into existence." And President Chapin rose to confer the college's first degrees. Other early contributions from the citizens of Beloit. Apart from donating land, labor, materials, and money, the citizens of Beloit contributed to the college in other foundational ways. Among the college's library boosters were the Young Ladies Literary Society, which purchased and donated books, as did the Reverend Horatio and Brinsmade of the First Congregational Church. The Time of Women also contributed cases for the college cabinet, which consisted of geological, paleontological, ornithological, and botanical specimens intended for study. The college's cabinet's small collection of Native American antiquities became the basis for the college's Logan Museum of Anthropology. In September of 1849, members of the Congregational Sewing Society, concerned about the bachelor Professor Bushnell's sparse living quarters in Middle College, lured him away while others put down a carpet, hung curtains, and upholstered an easy chair. More important is the overall life of the college, and students are going to bell on this. This is not the usual bell, it's as close as I can get. However, it was their gift of the college bell intended to ring for all college exercises. With no cash at hand, college officials hoped that the Neely Bell Company of Troy, New York would donate a bell. Neely countered with an offer to discount $24.20 off a bell costing $84.20. Now it seemed that the college would have to do without, that is, until the Congregational Sewing Society offered to pay through an installment plan. Neely shipped the 254-pound bell, soon installed in the middle college cupola, where it resided for the next 30 years, from meeting students to breakfast, to chapel services, to daily recitations, and to evening prayers. The letters also contributed funding for the construction of the college's next 2 buildings, North College, now known as Campbell Hall, and the college chapel and preparatory department, now known as South College, as well as for many buildings in the future. We've got a couple of pictures. The earliest college photograph, 1859, showing South College and Middle College and Off to the right, you can barely make out North College or Campbell, but magically they raised some trees for this etching base on it. And I've got a few pictures I just love, I can't resist. This is students out in front of North College. You can see how daredevil they were, and they got a couple close-ups. It's like, I need to see. Here's a picture of South College. Just as crucial, Beloit and surrounding communities contributed students. By 1872, for example, 1/5 of the 200 students at the college and academy hailed from Beloit. Can we have a college here? Beloit ensured that the answer was an emphatic yes. Here you can see the college in the center, top building there. And this is an advertising envelope, 1887, showing just how important the college was to the city, advertising it as the Yale of the West. Thank you.
Final speaker of the evening, Gerbitz.
I get nervous when people applaud ahead of me speaking. I want to set some expectations. First of all, I'm nowhere near in the league of these two. I'm not a historian, I'm not an educator, and basically you'll find out I'm not much of a speech maker. That said, I want to kind of bring in our company and how we have embraced history of this city and what Diane has ultimately tasked me with since the day I started. All right.
Yes.
Our company has a mission statement is we make an impact on communities by stimulating growth, creating jobs, and honoring history. I'm going to jump back about 15 years ago when Diane hired me. She actually made a very specific statement of what my responsibility was, at least my number one, and that was to build Beloit. And I remember exactly when she said it to me, and I thought I actually knew what she meant. And at the time, I associated it with buildings. Buildings are very important, without question. It's kind of my happy place. I'm pretty good at that. You want to talk about buildings, I'll talk about that all day long. But what she really meant was stimulating growth through using buildings, but creating jobs is something that she has driven into me for 15 plus years, all the time. And it is so important to us. But what I really did not understand, because I ultimately really have never been employed prior to that 15 years ago, was the history of this city and honoring it and championing it and bringing it out the best we possibly can. I couldn't start anywhere other than Beloit Ironworks. My office has been in there since the day I started. We moved a bunch of times, we've expanded. It is kind of the epicenter of this downtown in this city. And it's something, for those of you that, hopefully everyone knows where it is, it's right across the river. It's a big, gigantic building, about 1 million square feet, and it's an important aspect of this community from basically 1858 and on. And which at that point in time is when, obviously, the Maryland Houstons actually started their first, I'm going to do something here, I better do, I can't see this. A small machine shop led by Orson Merrill and George Houston starts production of machine parts. 1862, the foundry manufactures its first full-size paper-making machine. 1885, Maryland Houston Ironworks sells its assets for $20,000, a nearly $600,000 value today. They sell to 4 employees that join forces to form a new company called Beloit Ironworks. In 1896, Beloit Ironworks unveils a new state-of-the-art machine shop in downtown, right across the river. In 1949, the company grows and employs more than 1,500 people and opens its first international office in Paris, France. In 1962, Beloit Ironworks rebrands itself as the Beloit Corporation. I wanted to show this picture. This is one I actually just found. And it's absolutely incredible on how this campus, this entire part of the city was actually run. As you can kind of see, there's a raceway that runs through there. You can see there's what now is the spine road, was kind of a spine road back in those days. And I don't know if Kevin and Homer from CCI remember, one of the guys working to recreate that spine road, they found that raceway with a backhoe really quickly. And it wasn't intentional. But I just thought this was such an amazing picture. This is probably in about the 1930s, because the building right over on the left here, what is current day, that's where my office is, and that was about 1942. It's something that is I always wanted to be Indiana Jones when I was little. This is a building you can go into, and it's like it's an archaeology. It's just fine. It's just absolutely amazing on the things you can go through and see in there. And but through this process over these years, I just learned how important this thing was to this community, but more importantly, the people that were in it. I'm going to go kind of to the dark days, which I use relatively very little, which would have been 1986, Beloit Corp is sold to Harnischweger Industries out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. For those of you who know Harnischweger Industries, I am Milwaukee born and raised. A very large conglomerate. Beloit Corp at that point was a wildly successful business. Unfortunately, Harnischweger was not. And they took a very successful business and started dwindling it down over and over and over again. Until 1989, the Beloit Corp filed for bankruptcy and was closed. And I saw pictures when I first started, literally of computers, half a cup of coffee still on desks, when the lights got shut off on that final day, and those 1,500 employees lost their jobs. And I think it is the dark days. If you notice, like throughout the town, you'll see a lot of cranes on our buildings. They're drive-throughs. They're really cool and nice. A lot of those used to have actually Harnischweger little plaques on them. I purposely made sure every one of those are removed, so you'll never see them. I put this in here because if you go down the spine road, you see a lot of these pictures. I just think the mass of this product, when you see these gentlemen here working to it, how big this thing was. And it's so impressive, and I think there's a sadness to it because they don't make these anymore and certainly don't make them here. But it's pretty spectacular when you see what they have done and what they have made. So I'm going to flash forward. This is actually probably about 2012, but I'm going to jump back a little bit to 2001, and that's when Diane and Ken decided to come in and buy this campus. When I started, we had about 164 employees, I believe is what the total was, amongst about 6 different companies at that time in a section of this particular building. Ken and Diane wanted to take this and bring employees back. And that was their goal, that was their drive. That's what they tried to put in here and wanted to get more and more employees back into this gigantic building that, by the way, was built for one single company. It's a difficult task, by the way. It's an extraordinarily difficult task. That said, I loved the challenge. I really did. And I thought about so much of this early on, going through this process of thinking how I'm going to talk to you folks. And I remember a specific event, and I think I kind of created the event, but this whole big white roof over there was actually occupied about 500,000 square feet by one single company. They did storage for government contracts. And I went and I met the gentleman who ran it, and he said a lot of things I've just never forgotten. First of all, I'm walking in there, and there's seas of pallets everywhere, filled with engines and tires, parts of Jeeps from the government and all this stuff. It's seas of 500,000 square feet. And I said to him, why don't you stack this stuff? Why are you going this way? And he says, no, we don't like doing that. And I'm like, okay. And then a forklift came over and picked up a forklift with a little engine part on it. And I said, oh, are you guys delivering it? Because it looked like it was going to the dock doors. He goes, no. He said, look, we get paid by the square foot on the floor by the government, and we also get paid to move that pallet every 60 days from one side of the building to the other. For those of you who pay taxes, that's what it was. And I just thought, wow, that's really bad, but I kept arguing with him about stacking stuff, which I'm arguing against myself, by the way. I'm a real estate guy, so square footage is really kind of good for us, but it just didn't make any sense. But then he hit on something that I asked him. I said, how many employees do you have in this 500,000 plus square feet? He said, I have 3. And I said, okay, are you looking to grow? What do you want to grow to? And he said, I'd like to shrink to 2. And I said, oh, okay, great. And then I left the building, and I was with one of our guys, and he said, okay, I'll have the 5-year extension on your desk by morning. And I said, don't bother. I said, we're not signing it. Tell them to go find someplace else. And I said, it's time for us to rethink this building and start to think about what we're going to do to bring 1,500, 4,000 employees, whatever we can do back into this building. It's never going to happen in a giant building like this anymore, because you're just not going to get there. And he wasn't happy with me, of course, by not doing that lease, but I think that was the start of what you see today at Ironworks. And we have changed, we've tried our best, and I think we've done a pretty solid job in it, but it's not us, it's all these businesses that are in here now. We have 1,600 employees that are working in this business, in this building, 44 different companies, and we're about 50% there. So we got a ways to go, but it's become something so dynamic. The YMCA, as many of you may know, is right there on the corner. They do roughly 100,000 visits a month into the community, in this downtown community in particular. That is a dramatic change. And so I'm very proud of the team and these companies that are in this building and what they are doing. I put this in here for a little bit of a specific reason, is that this is Iron Tech. This is basically where we do co-working, we do innovation, we do startup businesses to grow within here. We are now on our 3rd expansion, in here, and it is dynamic and changing constantly. And what I will put this in here specifically is that this particular room, pretty much right where this first little green chair is, I was giving a speech to the Beloit Corp alumni, and I got done and I showed this picture actually, and a little old lady, she was about that tall, and she came up to me and she was crying, and she hugged me, and she said, I worked on that floor for 35 years of my life, and it just meant so much to me, but what she said later was, she goes, I am so happy to see this filled with people again. And I thought that really sunk in pretty hard with me, and so it just gave me, not just me, my entire team, the drive to keep going. This picture is a really good picture, isn't it? Look at them handsome devils. If you go to the guy, and I'm going to try and point them out, right there in the middle with the hair going like this. I was at the Historical Society looking for a concept for a steakhouse. And Paul Kerr was so good to me, he let me just go in there. I promised him if I broke something, I'd pay for it. And I was in there for hours on end, and I wasn't getting anywhere. And at this point, I knew Maryland Houston's Ironworks, but I didn't get inspired until I saw that guy. For some reason, that guy inspired me, and I don't know if he looked more like a clown or somebody that would be in a horror movie. It just stuck with me. And then I saw the Maryland Houston's Ironworks, and then it clicked back with me again, and that's where ultimately Maryland Houston Steak Joint came. We knew we wanted to do a steak joint. We had no idea what we wanted to do, name it and bring it in. But Maryland Houston Steak Joint is kind of a tribute to everything Beloit and Ironworks, Beloit College, all the way across the board. If you go through there, you can walk through, it's a story. And it's fantastic to see people walking through there. I can't tell you how many times I've had people looking at pictures and saying, oh, that's my uncle, that's my grandpa, whatever the case may be. And one example was the girl we were hiring as a general manager. She saw a picture, and we had a really good interview, by the way. And then she saw a picture. She goes, "That's my grandpa," and it was on 4th Street, and he was on a heart. And I said, "Look, the interview's good." And then she snapped a picture of it, and she texted it to her grandpa, and I heard, she put him on speaker, and she said, "Is that you?" And he just goes, "Pretty good looking dude, wasn't it?" So for whatever reason at that point, I'm like, okay, we're on the right track with this thing, and it's been great, and hopefully everyone enjoys it in the city. Ironworks Hotel kind of followed suit right after that. Ironworks Hotel is a little bit more to the manufacturing of this community, and then we kind of brought it up even into the state and bringing Wisconsin into it a little bit. We've been very proud of it. When you go in there, if you like rough and rustic, great boutique hotels. It's great if you want really frilly and fancy, go over to Goodwin. That's the other side. But it's turned out very nice for us, and it's kind of become that. When we wanted the hotel in Maryland, Houston's, and it's the only way to become is hotels used to be kind of the gathering place of communities, and we wanted to bring that back. And I'm happy with the team that's done such a good job of operating it and done just that. Wright and Wagner Dairy. Wright and Wagner Dairy is something that, for those of you who are familiar with this is on the actual opposite side. We've been building a couple buildings over there. The dairy itself, and I'm going to actually look at this one a little more carefully here. Charles Wright and Orville Sturdivant start a creamery in Grand, Illinois. They then sell the creamery and cross the state line to develop a milk business in Beloit. Sturdivant and Wright Creamery opens on Mill Street as Beloit's first bottled milk plant, one wagon delivering fresh milk to city residents. The first day they sold 12 quarts of milk in 1907. 1909, the business expands to 1,700 customers. Ira Wagner enters the firm. 1914, first dairy pasteurized bottled milk as advertised in Milk Plant Monthly. I'm sure you guys get that every month. 1921, Sturdivant resigns due to health. Firm is incorporated under the name Wright and Wagner Dairy. In 1930, the company merges with Beatrice Foods and becomes one of the leading food companies in the nation. They had the manufacture of evaporated milk, powdered milk, ice cream, cottage cheese, butter, and caramel-based candy, or caramel candy base. This is going to be the good part of an acquisition. 1988, Carey Ingredients acquires the company and uses the dairy as their Beloit headquarters. That's the good side, because as these things, Archivist, not good. Carey Ingredients, extraordinarily good. While they are no longer down there, as most of you know, their headquarters are out on I-90 and 43 over there, and they are a dynamic company. They are an innovative company. They're one of our largest employers. I'll speak for Jerry Behan. He is an amazing CEO, and he is dedicated to this community. Diane, all of us can say how passionate that man is about this city. And that is what should happen. And I think, and hopefully Jerry's proud of everything they've done. I know he is. And that's the story that I do like telling. We don't take Carey off of any of our creams. This was actually the original couple of buildings. And then the real next one was that guy. That's pretty handy. Yeah, we did our, we love to save stuff. I mean, we really, really do, and we work pretty hard at it. We worked extraordinarily hard to save this one. Unfortunately, it was just not savable anymore, and we couldn't make it make any sense. And that's where you end up seeing what is next, which is the Wright and Wagner loss. And we did that because we needed to bring housing to this downtown again. You know, the housing, certainly when I started here, was pretty low in the downtown. And these buildings are full, and people love them. And by the way, the vast majority of people live in there also work overnight. So that's a really good sign as well. I'll hit on Henry Dorbaker. This is a project we actually are starting to work on. Diane challenged me with what's after dinner. You know, you go to dinner, friends, family, whatnot, which is wonderful. You can go to the bar, which is also wonderful, depending on how you want to look at it. Or what are you going to do? Like a lot of cities, we just don't have a lot to do after you have a nice dinner or with your friends and family. So we needed something for entertainment. Henry Dorbaker was quite frankly my intelligent way of finding something. I went in bowling Beloit, and it led me down the rabbit hole, and eventually I found the name Henry Dorbaker, which Fred actually helped me get even additional information on that. Quite frankly, I just liked the name. I just thought it was kind of a cool name. But it came to be that Henry Dorbaker, I mean, he was a big deal in the bowling world back in then. He won tournaments all over the Midwest, and he started the very first bowling alley in downtown Beloit. It's where First National Bank is, where it was over there. And so we just kind of started to build this brand, and it's going to be across the river, and it'll be right on the other side of the bridge, the walking bridge. Have outdoor event space, concert space outside. I'll tell you what it's not. It's not Chuck E. Cheese. Kids are nice, but we kind of want this to be more for adults. So the goal here is to have ducking and bowling, darts, axe throwing, pinball, lots of music, lots of things, food for people to come and gather and just have fun. We have a concept that's a tenant of ours, actually, in another property in Indiana, and it is really a fun environment. As you can kind of see, this will look like what that building has looked like for 100 years. We've already blasted it, and we want to embrace every little bit of history that's in that building that we possibly can. And we're excited. We're actually starting to beat it all up pretty good. And it's opening, well, depends on when we're opening. I mean, we got word we're supposed to be opening in July yesterday, so I got to figure that one out. But we'll work at that. The last thing I want to bring up is a project that we are starting, and it's called Hanchett Hall. How many of you are familiar with Hanchett Hall here? It's a very special place. It's this building we've owned for a number of years, and we're deciding we're going to bring it back to life for what it was built, what it was intended to be. And this was the gathering place for Beloit community. This is where a very special person actually came and spoke. And you walk into it to this day, you will go back in time. It is an amazing space, and I'm excited to finally get in. For me, I told Diane this earlier, it's the most important building I've ever worked on. I don't get the opportunity to work on a building that Abraham Lincoln came in and spoke about his, how he wanted to stop slavery and stop that growth in this country. And it's pretty special as a whole. He was actually here in town. He was actually eating, and I believe 2 to 3 college students came over there and met with him and got to talk with him back in those days. And then he kind of came and gave his speech. There's a nice plaque out there for those of you who want to read much better details. We're going to start this project. We're starting it already. And we want to bring it back to being a gathering place for the entire community. I put some other pictures in here. It was raining really good today, so I actually said, well, let's just put that in there. Hanchett Hall is the one on the left. That's a pretty cool picture. And I think I read something where Hanchett Hall is on the very far left down. It's the skyscraper, as they say. And then if you look at where it says furniture on the right, for those of you who go Bagels and More or Bushel and Peck's, that's right there. So it was pretty fun. This is the ugly part of it. It's certainly, powder blue isn't the greatest color in the world, so we're going to kind of bring that back to the original state of it. You can kind of see in the upper hand right, that's actually the room. This picture actually makes it look much nicer than what it actually is right now. But by and large, everything you see in that upper picture, we're going to bring it back to life and use it for what it was originally intended to. We still have to do the tour, by the way. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, so we have a few minutes for Joel to give a reaction to these fantastic presentations about Beloit.
Thank you very much. It was 3 fantastic presentations, very different from one another, and I will have something to say about each of them, but not in the order in which they were presented. As I was you, Rod, and as I was sitting listening to you, what was actually reverberating in my head was that many years ago, a very famous economist called Milton Friedman pointed out that the only job of of a CEO of a company was to maximize shareholder value. If that's what they did, they filled their job. Nothing else mattered. They shouldn't be doing anything. If all CEOs did that, the world would be a better place. And I have huge respect for Milton Friedman, one of the smartest men I've ever met. On this, he's so bloody wrong. And listening to Rob, clear, I don't know what you do for, you didn't tell us anything about what you do for shareholder value. But you care about a lot more, and it's really heartwarming to see, a CEO, a person who actually, unlike most academics, actually knows how to run things, how to manage things, but also care deeply, not only about the history, but between the lines. Clearly you care about your workers, you care about the environment in which they are, and there are other stakeholders and the shareholders. And I think Milton Friedman knew that too. He was just making a rhetorical point because that was the kind of guy he was. But in fact, I would say you talk to the median CEO in this country today, and I think thankfully they're more like Rob than the sort of caricature that Milton Friedman depicted, and I'm grateful for that. Beatrice, I thought this was an active magisterial survey of Beloit, which, most people don't know very much about. And it's a story of progress, but there too, what I heard is, yes, this is progress, this is advance, but progress has costs. And there were people who were victims. You talked very nicely about this indigenous population, who in some sense had to pay the price for the progress. And this is very important to always remember, that progress is a great thing. There are always costs and always victims. And finally, Fred, I got to tell you, you said something about Beloit being, the Yale of the West. Well, I actually went to Yale many years ago, and from the beginning we knew that it was the Beloit of the So, now I want to say a little bit more about colleges. And, I'm not going to tell the audience here anything about your own colleges. I'm a guest here, and you live here. But there is, I think, in the history of the United States, actually higher education plays a really interesting role, not only in providing human capital, but also by sort of sketching, what it is that makes America work. And the nice thing about America from the very beginning is that they cared about higher education. There are far more colleges in the United States per capita or whatever than there are anywhere in the world. And that actually started in the 19th century. 19th century, colleges were founded left, right, and center. And I, as it happens, two of my graduate students wrote a paper about this. And they actually pointed out that what was driving the establishment of universities was actually religious diversity. Because, and in fact, Beloit, my understanding is, and I just actually looked this up on Wikipedia, so this is not, watertight information, but apparently it started off as a Congregationalist college, informally, and then it sort of gradually gave up on that. But in fact, if you look at what's happening in the Midwest, Iowa, Ohio, Indiana, a lot of colleges were founded because people of particular denomination wanted to have their own college. Now that's one component that really matters. The other is that these colleges were always in competition with one another. So they were competed for students, and they competed for faculty, and they competed for donations, they competed. And this is what we still have in this country, ladies and gentlemen. We have a huge system of colleges, but unlike the system, say, in Italy or in the Netherlands or elsewhere, they are not run by government bureaucrats. But they're not run by anybody. Each college is run by its own people, and we let the free market in, between colleges play its game. And that's not much fun for college administrators. They have to worry about where the money is going to come from. Whereas if you are in Italy, you know that at some point the check arrives from Rome, so to speak, and that's what you have. Not so at Beloit, not so at Northwestern, not so anywhere else. And that's hard, it's tough, competition ain't fun, but on a social level, and this is the great insight of economics, on the social level, it provides a better product than a system that is run by a central government. And that's, I think, Beloit is a prime example of that. But in fact, we have hundreds and hundreds of similar colleges throughout the country, and it works. All right, so those are my thoughts. Now, I want to spend the evening by telling you, since we should all go smiling, by telling you a funny little story. And I'm trying to tell a funny little story about academics, which is sort of hard to do because, it's not really, most of them don't have a sense of humor, though. But I'll tell you this story anyway. And it's a story that reflects the life of many academics, including people here. It's a story about a professor in a college who's written a book, which is what professors do. And his publisher says, look, what we really would like to do is for you to travel around in your state and go to colleges, the academic angle comes in, and give a lecture about your book, and that will help sales, and da-da-da. Wow, says the professor, and I really have to do it. Yes, they said, please do this, it helps sales, and we will provide you, this is important, we will provide you with a car and driver who will take you to each college, you give your lecture, he takes you back home. Now, all right. So, car shows up, and every evening for a month long, they drive to each college. So the driver basically sits there, and when the professor is giving his lecture, the driver has very little to do, so he may as well come in and listen to the lecture. So each evening they go to this lecture hall, something like this, the professor stands, he gives his talk, and the driver sits in the back room. So, they do this for a couple of weeks, and one evening they start talking, and the professor says, I'm getting so tired and so bored with this. I don't know why I'm doing this. And the driver says, well, you're funny you should mention it, because I've been sitting to all your lectures, and I know them by heart, and I can predict every question you're going to be asked. I can predict, and I know the answer. Yeah, says the professor, well, So then the professor sits for me and says, you know what? Let's have an experiment. Tonight, he says to the driver, you give the lecture, and I sit in the back row and listen to you. Well, the driver waited here, so they're about the same size, so the professor takes off his suit and his tie, gives it to the driver gives the professor his leather jacket and his cap. They walk into the lecture room, and the driver stands here at the podium, gives the lecture. The professor sits in the back row with his, leather jacket. And the driver gives a perfect lecture. And questions starts coming up. And these are all questions that, come up every lecture, so he gives perfect answers. And finally, toward the end of the lecture, some little old lady sitting on the front row raises her hand and asks the driver a completely sort of out of left field question he's never heard before, and he's got no clue, and he becomes all red in the face. And then his eyes light up, and he says, Madam, that's the stupidest question I've ever heard. Even my driver sitting in the back can answer that.
Okay, we have time for a few questions. Any questions? Who has a question in the back? No. The driver? No. And could you introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Rebecca. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a double major in political science and political identity studies, and I'm a student here at Beloit. My question is kind of open-ended, but more towards Mr. Gerbitz, is it? Gerbitz?
Close enough, yeah.
Sorry, my apologies. And my question is, where do you see the future of Latinx-owned businesses in the Beloit area, cognizant of the changes within the downtown Beloit area and the expansion for increasing tourism and attraction towards the area? I'm thinking specifically on the road of ABC, where the ABC Stadium lies. And there's a complex of 1208 Sherland Avenue. And within this complex, there was a recent sale that comprised of Mexican grocery stores, a Spanish-speaking church, and Mexican bakeries. So where do you see the future with, like, you know, wanting to increase tourism and attraction, but the future of Latinx-owned businesses within the area?
Well, I think the Latin-owned businesses are coming, and they're coming pretty big. I mean, that population is the fastest population growth in the city. And I think it's tremendous. I mean, we have to keep looking at other ways to bring all of our community, everyone in our community, into this. And I'm going to use an example of like the Lincoln Academy as a whole has been such an important part of certainly Diane's initiatives. I had the privilege of being a part of it in the beginning, and the engagement from the Hispanic community was spectacular. And that's remained to this day, I believe. And as far as the growth into other businesses, we're looking at businesses constantly. I'll tell you that 99 out of 100 don't actually even come, regardless of Hispanic or any of that. It's just kind of the way our business works, but it comes through planning and continual planning. Sherland Avenue is an example. There's a nice big piece of dirt on the other side of that stadium that has some planning going on in South Beloit right now. I don't know the distance of it at this point, how far I've come along. I believe it's housing is another additional housing offering down here. We need to get more workforce housing, more affordable housing down here as well. But, the market rate stuff is great, and we need more of that. But we have to start focusing, and we are starting to focus more, not just as Hendricks, but also as the community, as Beloit 200 as an example, a big focus on to affordable housing and bringing that into this immediate downtown. The businesses will come with more and more people. That's just an unrefutable fact. And I'd love to see more restaurants. We love doing restaurants, but we don't want to do them all. We want to bring in other ones. Quite frankly, right now on the Hispanic side in downtown, we're pretty lacking. Peter's closed, unfortunately. The fajita house is no longer there. We need to get more Hispanic food offerings down here as well. Not that there's not any, but I mean, we need to bring more into the community.
All right, so my name is Jalen Ponder, and I'm currently a junior. I had a question, and it can be answered by any of the three panelists. I had the pleasure of meeting Joel a little bit earlier today. We had an interesting conversation about what the importance of history was, and we had a brief discussion about how with history, it's hard to predict the future. When we say that history repeats itself, it's hard to figure out how the internet is going to change the world when we've only had the printing press. It's hard to realize how the automotive industry is going to change the world when we look at the horses that used to drive wagons. So my question for the panelists today would be, looking at the history, we see that we've comprised a lot of information about the history of Beloit. What important information do you guys find that we bring from the history besides just looking back at the history and finding that it's good to reflect? Do you find that there's any important information that still brings value to us today?
I'd much rather turn this over to my colleague Ellen Joyce, but since that wouldn't be appropriate. Well, I mean, I tried to say it at the end of my talk, and that is to take lessons from earlier groups of people who have come to Beloit, take the positives from them, why did they come, look for the sorts of similarities in the population that's here now. And I think your question, the young woman who asked the question before, is thinking along those lines as well. I mean, immigration improves this community. immigration has always improved this community. So we need to have good schools and we need to have good jobs. And I think everybody in here agrees on both of those. And a good life for people. I think that's what I take away from history. An understanding of people and their values over time and what they're looking for and how they get it. That's what I take away from history.
So I would also say with the college that you can learn a lot about, from the pioneers about how they worked so hard to get a college and how they struggled and then succeeded through their determination and to working together. And I can see all kinds of common ground between, even though the language changes and the faces change and all that, there's an awful lot of common ground between what they did and what we are trying to do now.
Great, so I think we have time for one more question, and there are some people in the room that I also want to introduce themselves, so I'm going to hand over.
Hi, I'm Holly Reuter, and I'm a history producer with PBS Wisconsin, and I'm here with my co-producer, my name is Caroline, and we're working on an episode for a series we produce called Wisconsin Hometown Stories. Each episode is an hour long, and we go into the people, industries, events that shaped the community into what it is today. And Beloit's going to be the next community that we're profiling. So we're currently in the early stages of production, and we're excited to come here today and hear everyone talk. We're actually going to be interviewing Fred and Beatrice, so we're excited for those interviews. And Rob, we had another question for you. You had mentioned Beloit 200. Could you talk a little bit about the goals and your involvement with that organization and what you're working on?
Sure. I've been involved with the group pretty much since I started here 15 years ago. It's a private group of business leaders that got together back in the 1980s unfortunately for a very bad reason that happened in the community. And they said, this is not how we want our community to go. And they started to get together and they started to plan. And big ideas, very high level, big ideas. And then they would raise money and then start to execute the plan with the city, with certainly with Greater Beloit Economic Development, all the local players. And we're doing the same thing to this day. We have initiatives that change all the time. Education is one of our initiatives to this day. Housing is another initiative. Policing is another initiative for us. It's really a pretty wonderful group because it's just free thinking, and no idea is a bad idea. And you kind of just keep going at it and chipping away at it. There's no, and I don't mean any offense to anyone in the government here, there's no government on that particular group. And that's mostly because we can be free in thinking like that, and then we work with the local governments and take these projects to where they can be. Riverside Park is a Beloit, at that time Beloit 2000 project. River at the Confluence, Nature at the Confluence, is Beloit, that one would be Beloit 200, I believe, project as well. So it's really, that's what that organization is. And Carrie Frank is actually here. She's our director, and she handles way more than I do, that's for sure. And if you'd like, if you'd like to talk to her more, you certainly can do that.
Okay, so could we give our panelists one more round of applause?